I have to go back.
You just minimize that. Every year.
I don't have any comments if I get someone to cure it.
By control.
You got my IT guy. I can go back. Well, user and I do recovery, just for that, be short.
Because we're on YouTube right now, so you have to set it out. Shut it off. Go to your Zoom. Yeah, you got it. You'd also turn around. And then you can share your screen, the agenda on it.
Oh, I don't share. I don't have anything.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Make sure you got what you
So, time is 4:31 and I'm going to call, June, not January, June 9th, 2025 regular planning commission meeting order. Quick, we'll have the entire planning commission is here for the first time in months. Stupendous. Thank you guys for, we're back. First up, we've got citizens to be heard. I don't think I see anybody here who is here to make a comment online or in the room. Is that right? Cool. Super. We can revisit that again before we close the meeting, just in case anyone else jumps on. By way of ex parte communications and disclosures, I have not had any opportunity for anyone else to.
Kid.
Yep, that's your kid. Good job. So we should look at the moving on, approving the meeting minutes from Monday, May 27th. I was absent at this meeting, and so I'll abstain from the vote to approve.
I actually do have a correction. My name is misspelled.
That has happened before, Jerry. We're sorry.
It's spelled incorrectly on page 3, but it's correct on page 4. Should be AES, not AS.
We will make a note of that. Sorry, Jerry. AES, not ASU.
Otherwise, I'd make a motion to approve it. Second.
Seconded, all in favor of the minutes as amended. So adopted. All right, planning staff report. Chrissy, thank you so much. It's been a busy month.
Yeah, so we have some changes in the planning department. Mikkel is no longer in the office. So it's me and I'm Lisa, recruited Lisa as a.
Lisa, nice.
We've met before. I sleep in the building.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. There was an implosion in building as well, so with that, we have combined forces to implode together. Yes.
Yeah.
We did great time, yes.
County building department?
Yeah, so she's a permit tech at the building department. As of today, she will be taking on sort of a administrative role in the planning department to help me with initial changes or initial tracking of completeness for new applications. And then hopefully we'll move her into a more permanent position within the planning, building, engineering department. We also have our new engineer here too. Oh, wow.
Nice to meet you.
He'll be starting on the 23rd.
That's great.
So, you know, things are looking up. Did you want to introduce yourself? Would that be okay?
Sure, so my name is Sean Yates. 2 decades of engineering experience. Really thankful to be here. It's great to be in a setting where folks come to a meeting, before the meeting, they're talking about their operating. It's a really great job. I live in Monticello, meeting each way. Yeah, it's great to be here.
When I was in the department, the engineer was my most favorite person. I always gave him a little hard stuff to do.
Yeah, I do my best. I have a lot of that.
So we're really very, very excited to have him jumping on board. We still have contracts, engineering, planning, and building services available to help with the shifts that are happening now. Mikkel wanted me to let you all know how much being on the planning commission, how much she's learned from all of you, how much she's going to receive us, so. Thank you all.
That's her. Thank you, Chrissy.
Mhm.
And thanks for taking the time to be here. You folks, really appreciate just showing up. Evening meeting on Monday, it's not the most fun time, but I'm looking forward to working with you more. Up next is Trish Lee, County Commission update. What do you got for us?
Very quick, you covered some of the things, so that's great. Yeah, this. Mikkel sent an email to both of us and just so you guys know, she moved, she's up in Cache Valley. And her son is up there and her daughter-in-law, and so I think it's a really nice fit for her. But she sent a very nice email and wanted to reach out to all of you. Update on staff, you've already mentioned it, so it's great. You were looking at me, I'm like, who are you? I know.
Yeah.
So it's really cool that you're here.
Yes,
We're excited about that. And then just an update, they have been doing some interviews for the planning director. That's kind of where that sits. And then on the June 3rd meeting, we just had two things that I think are relevant to you. We've already talked about this one. There was this non-conversion agreement that was on the consent agenda. I pulled it off and just had Chrissy kind of explain a little bit more about that to the county commission. And again, we should see those things in. We have some clarification on that. And then the other one was just the ordinance establishing Grand County's tax sale procedure, and that passed unanimously. Basically, you know, if we have a situation where going into foreclosure, I'm saying that correctly. And so we had a situation recently where I think it was very close. It was rectified and the people were able to keep their homes, is that correct? But we basically didn't have those procedures in place. I know. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's it for me. Yes.
Any idea if you're gonna do more of the subcommittee?
Yes, Brian just reached out to me a couple days ago and I said, well, it'd be nice to get this solidified, hopefully
Yeah.
done. And then it seemed like the next thing on the priority list that wasn't already kind of, because I know you guys are already working on the dashboard as far as that, you know, HASU, et cetera, and so on, would be the 100K and how to spend that money.
Yeah, the Moab Area Task Force
Right,
and they applied for an economic development grant and we said
right,
no to that, but because
Right.
Melody was like, well, we have this
Yeah.
100,000 pot, could we spend from there? And
right.
I don't know if this is something that we would like write a recommendation letter for.
Right. That's great, but
Yeah.
yeah, so that was to me, the next item on the list, so
Okay.
I sent that back to Brian and Mike and said. You know, it'd be good to maybe have you, also Caitlin, I know that they have some, you know. Laura and Caitlin do a lot of work outside of Mackel,
Mhm.
right, so
Right.
where would that money be best spent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Follow up there, like where your head's at, I would let staff, whoever, know that this past legislative session, there are some new rules about subawards of money in the state of Utah, and whether it's direct award grant or competitive grant, yada, yada, yada. I wish I could cite the title off the top of my head, but you should be familiar with those if we're going to be referencing or recommending disbursements or awards.
But totally,
Consistent with like that new guidance. There was something about how you solicited competitively versus if you can just give it to them and who can just take money versus who has to compete. So, think about that later.
I have to catch up on a much lower level than even that, and I have no idea what this conversation is happening at all.
Sounds good.
Can't do it. No.
So, sorry, Trish, is that everything? Super, thank you so much. On to the next thing, we do have one, it's not a public hearing, it's just an action item. Good Lord. So we've been talking about this for a while, we've punted it and it's been working with the task force and the subcommittee meetings and data, as he's been making revisions. And we have finally a high density housing overlay draft language to chew on and consider. Whether to send a favorable or unfavorable recommendation to the county commission. We did. Negotiate is a heavy word, but we did ask the county commission to be patient with us while we worked through this language. I would like to try and recommend or not, but make a determination on this draft ordinance at this meeting. So I'm gonna try my very best to just keep it kind of focused on the language of the ordinance as it's written. And a couple of ground rules before we just dive in and we start raising each other's hands. This has been honed to a lot. And if this is gonna happen a lot with me, we read something and I don't understand why it reads like that. 9 out of 10 odds are that someone else does understand why it reads like that, and it reads like that on purpose. But just remembering that Chrissy, staff, folks on the task force have been working really hard. They turned it inside out twice, so. With that, we've all got a copy of the draft ordinance in front of us, I hope.
I'm sorry that the ones that I passed out didn't print in color. The
Mine's in
green
color.
isn't showing up as green, maybe it's just the way the ones, but.
It's. Printers have moods, again, with the vote on thing.
Who wants to look at this one with the green?
Yeah.
Mine has green on it. I'm happy to share.
My green is kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and
So this is pretty standard Microsoft red line, right? So greens are added language, strike throughs are deleted language. And that's pretty much it.
Yes.
Does anybody wanna, jump in with their initial thoughts? I'm hoping we will, yeah.
I was wondering, was there any more public comment that came in?
Super.
Really quickly, just so that I can, so that for focus sake, the areas that were directed to me at the last meeting, what I took from it, the local area, we need to decide which one we want to recommend, but to push forward. And then we spent most of our time on this 50%. So I left the one that I had before. I created an alternative. And I still stand by that language. I think that there's confusion on what I meant. And then I did an alternative one that was the one that I think people think that I meant. Creating that in the alternatively, and then there's also an alternatively for just removing ownership for permission. And then, or another alternatively, which is just to keep the language as it is in the original ordinance. And recommend approval with that, with the other changes, to just expand options.
And for additional clarification, Chrissy, this draft has not yet been approved by Attorney Stocks. So it has not seen legal yet, and it will.
So it went through initial legal with Stephen. He did make some recommendations and those were incorporated. The disability definition that I added, there was some, this will go through a different sort of legal review once we get which ones you want to go forward. But it's been reviewed, except for the pieces that we need to review that you guys are committed.
The point in bringing that up is that it is more important at this stage to focus on the spirit of the text and not the form.
Exactly. So if there's a misspelling or something about it. The numbering will be corrected, so let's not focus on that. You guys haven't been doing that, so that's fine. Other thing I wanted to bring up, the deed restriction that I spoke about last time, and I didn't incorporate this time. So that deed restriction is similar to an SIA. It would will be done in the attorney's office and only in the attorney's office. It's not part of the land use code. It won't be part of the land use code. It's just a deed, what the deed restriction would look like. I gave it to you guys just so you could see. what it, what it would do, how it would prevent us from having to record a bunch of new final plats with 57 signatures on them. So, but though that deed restriction is just a legal contract that would be done in the county attorney's office with the county attorney, and isn't, the land use code is what allows us to enter into that, that's why it's mentioned. But the actual deed restriction that I presented to you guys last time is just a county attorney document that he will deal with owners that come.
And
That in that language would be, it's gonna be mostly the same, but it's gonna be based off what we look at here. So there will never be anything in there that's not agreed to by the applicant, because it is independently agreed to by the applicant. And allowed for this.
Question? Those change with each application, correct?
Not necessarily, I mean, it'll be largely the same, it could. So there's language in here that talks about if we can decide to incorporate this 50% language, the deed restriction would include some of the stuff on ownership in it, and so they will vary, a little bit on whether it's owner occupied or owner owned by someone in Salt Lake and rented. So those will change a little between their independent.
And there were questions, not last meeting, but it was a meeting before, about foreclosures.
Yeah,
Et cetera, and getting loans. How is that cleaned up?
So if you look at the language about, let me give you a section. Legal action. That has all been changed to address Barney's comments. Instead of creating separately, I just removed, so it speaks to seeking an injunction. Or injunctions including without limitations with property in violation of this section, all remedies will be.
What section, what's that?
It's 4711B.
What's that?
Yeah. County may institute any appropriate legal action or proceeding necessary to ensure compliance with this section, including without limitation, damages, specific performance, criminal citations for fraud or misrepresentations, and injunctions, including without limitation, an injunction requiring eviction of the occupant. So because I incorporated that eviction language with a injunction, I'm hoping that will clear up any of her concerns, because it would be, an injunction is something that is issued by a judge. It's not something that the county can do without going to court, and this just allows us to do
I like that.
so, and I think that addresses any of her concerns. And then anything that was on the deed restriction, like I said, would be done as a voluntary agreement through the attorney's office. They could also have an attorney there to negotiate those terms. So we don't need to address those at all.
I feel like that's pretty clean, thank you. Good.
And it's after reviewing all the documents Ronnie sent me, that this current version should be. I'm not a lender, but I feel like I've addressed all of the concerns there.
With the deed restriction.
With this legal action language that he was concerned with, it talked about foreclosure and removing a renter and a bunch of stuff. This just talks about, we can take you to court and ask for all of these things, including our attorney's fees.
Gonna go with the low hanging fruit one, get this out of the way. Make some progress. I think regarding the definition of local area, we got pretty clear messaging from the workshop that we had months and 2 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. That the 75-mile radius was pretty well agreed to as fitting for all the parties involved. I don't see a problem with it one way or the other. The reality is that either of those definitions will encompass all of the parcels that this code will affect. So
Tony,
I have it, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna mention, we had comments from Aaron and Megan in the last meeting too, in support of that. Thought they both brought up really good points.
And I would still say, I don't like it. I think the spirit of the HDHO was for local housing.
for actively employed households. And I'm really not convinced that, let's say, somebody who lives in Green River, or Monticello, who works there should get credit so they can be housed here. I just don't think that's what the HDHO was for. I thought it was for actively employed households, for people who live here. And I understand the desire to live here, but to commute from Monticello to work here and get, I'm sorry, to work in Monticello when you're here and get credit for being a local worker, I don't think makes sense.
I lean a little bit towards that. I feel like it's more community focused. You're living and working here.
Give me a moment. So we're talking about the definition of local area.
And I think, Tony, most of the language on it is about where people, do you work in the local area? That would get you credit.
No, the on page 1, it says that your business serves the local area. For example, a firm in Monticello that makes doorknobs can sell doorknobs in Moab, they serve the local area.
Well,
So it's, yeah.
like Aaron brought up the company he works for.
I was gonna use Red Mechanical, but then I went with doorknobs. So that's like, let's remember, we're not drawing a line around where this rule takes effect. We're drawing a line around,
How do you regulate that though?
I mean, let's not go down here. Yeah. How do you regulate any of this? These are regulations.
For one of these is case by case.
Yeah.
Every single.
I think the point, as I understand it, talking from listening to Commissioner Martinez at our workshop, was that the 75-mile radius thing is specifically intended to get to Thompson and Castle Valley, and it's just communities just outside our bubble, and that it's just Grand County is bigger than just Moab, and is the way I understood his point.
But this takes us outside of Grant County. The change that was made after the HDHO was approved was to include the 84532 area zip code. And the reason was there are people just below Grand County's border, which really are locals in that area of Spanish Valley. And that's pretty much where the 84532 zip code is going to get you. But to go 75 miles away takes you into at least 2 different counties. Now, I know, the political thing might be to say, well, county commission's going to do it anyway. That's possible. That's possible. But from my standpoint, this is not the way they should go, and they can change it if they want to. But I hope they consider this.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I guess the only comment I've got is that I was leaning along the same lines as you, and then Aaron brought up the where you're based and where you do most of the work, and most of the work is not in Monticello. There's not that much there for a service type industry like mechanical. So I think there is good reason to extend that if people in fact are actually serving this community and doing it from a remote area and want to live with it.
Yeah, I mean,
But does this mean, and I now would have to go back and read it even more closely.
I would suggest we do.
Yeah.
The first section,
The
this local area definition is specifically directed at where applicant's employer works. We're talking about the definition of active employed household. This is not like where I live thing. It's a what area does my employer serve thing. It's really myopic and granular. And these codes will not have any effect in Green River, that's in Emory County. They won't have any effect in Spanish Valley, that's in San Juan County. I mean, our land use code only, I started off by saying these codes will only affect a very small, like, all the parcels are already well contained within this definition, so.
I would only say on this local area stuff, if we look at 4.7.3 definition of local employment. It goes, rattles on, but the very last sentence, it benefits the person's physical presence within the boundary of the local area. So it does mean, if I'm benefiting Monticello.
I would also just like to point out that 84532 is a larger than 75-mile radius zip code. So this is like.
I don't believe so when I looked it up on so I think it just goes down into Spanish Valley. If you're saying, I believe that's right. Does somebody
I
else?
think it goes all the way, well, because this would be both, it would be within the 84532 zip code. Or is within a 75-mile radius, which means that as long as you're in, like if you're in Grand County, no matter where you're at in Grand County, that's the local area. The 75-mile was pulled from the procurement policy. It extends down, I believe, to Blanding. Yes, extends down to Blanding.
Right.
And I don't know if it extends
So
over
I can
into
help out
Colorado.
beside that. When I took this, where it came from the 75 and we made that on the procurement plan is we took actually how far out in the county to go. So if you took the northern boundary, right, it would stretch, way out there, it would be about 75 miles, right? So that's where that came from. Now, keeping that inside the county, it also has to be in the state of Utah. So that does exclude Grand Junction.
So this, to my point, they're like overlays on top of overlays. This is the easy one to answer. Let's remember that.
Yeah, the way I see, always arguing it is like, this keeps the arrows pointing in towards Moab. And the kind of idea of that was, we're giving up density so that Grand County can serve itself. The question is like, in my mind, like with the company I work for, like, I thought about that. It is covered because it does service this area. So even though it is in Blanding, it would be available. The question is it fair? Let's say we had a county engineer that was working here. He moves here and then he takes a job down in Monticello again, but stays in Moab. And is that fair to? There's parts of this thing where I'm like, hey, you're retired, you get to stay in here. Is it like you're a part of the community? You took a job out in locally, according to this. Now you're kicked out. That is my dilemma with this. I'm like, do you unhouse somebody for taking a job kind of in our local area? Like,
I don't think that's on the table in any scenario. You don't just unhouse someone.
well, they become not qualified because they're no longer they're no longer locally employed.
Only if they give up their renting or they sell their house.
Yeah.
You have to qualify.
Yeah.
So you can own a place, like if under Bob's saying, you can own a place.
Yep.
I take a job in Monticello, I'm still qualified.
Yep.
Gotcha.
I guess that, I don't know how many of you ever did a 75-mile commute, but I actually did that for about a year and a half. It's not something that I wish on anybody. But I don't know. I mean, I guess there are probably people who are serving this area that may live 75 miles away. And yeah, they're doing.
I work with 5 guys that live in Bluff, Monument Valley, and they drive every day.
But I would think if we think people that are living in Blanding and want to live here and keep working in Blanding every day are going to do that, I would think that would be I think that's a bit of a stretch. I'm guessing what we're gonna get are people that are actually spending most of their time working here.
And I would like to remember the reason I lean in favor of the 75-mile radius language rather than not including that number is that there are very little community service industries in Moab. It's not like red mechanical planning, right? There aren't a lot of light industry, there aren't a lot of manufacturing, there's not a lot of economic diversity in this town. And we're talking about where the local area is as it applies to a person's place of employment. So we cast a much wider net with a lot more different types of employment if we include a larger area. That's my thing. It's like, this isn't where that is not a radius wherein these rules will apply. This is not to say that you're going to get high density anywhere within a 75-mile radius, right? This is to say that a person can work somewhere 75 miles away and still be eligible. Now, unless you're a prom, where are you working? That's 76 miles away. Right? Just my thoughts.
Sorry. My other thought to that too is people who are commuting to work here, like at City Market, we have a couple who's been driving from New Club for 3 years because there's no available jobs with the wages that it's cheaper for them to commute and live in another state. And if people are living here, shopping here, doing all of their day-to-day things here, the likelihood of them working in Monticello or Blanding or Green River is not that high. As someone who tried to live here and work in Monticello in an effort to move back home, it wasn't I mean, when I say it's not practical, it was like a $10 an hour difference because the economy is so much different. And I think that's why we have so many people from Blanding, Monument Valley, Bluff, Monticello traveling to work here. And if we're looking at new housing for primary residential occupancy by actively employed households, these are people who are already working here, who are making the effort to commute. We should be making it accessible for them to actually establish housing here. And then we're bringing people into the community on top of that.
But those are the people who are absolutely eligible for housing because they are working here. So that's an open gate for them to get housing. So under the proposal I would make, that's fine, that's great, they can do that. What they can't be doing is working in Monticello and say, you know, I've now served the local area because I'm working down in Monticello. So I'm eligible for housing here. And the only final point I'll make is it is citizens of this area who are taking on the higher density, which is, it is a burden. And I think it ought to be then for people who are locally can't find housing, who are working here,
So
serving this community.
let's run the hypotheticals, right? Like, how about a person who works for a federal agency like the National Park Service or the BLM, who has multiple field stations and doesn't exactly get to choose always where they're assigned? So the Canyon Country District is superior to Moab Field Office and the Monticello Field Office. What if someone gets just like laterally moved from Moab to Monticello, right? They were really talking about that. I know a couple people who took the deferral because they couldn't do that. I mean, we're a pretty big agency town. It just like, I just think that, you know, for a lot of people, working in Monticello does provide, for example, working in Green River does provide, like, master local benefit here too. I mean, it's keeping in like consistent rationale with the overall conversation, which is like, you know, people come to this region, not to this city, right? Trail ambassador thing, all the, you know, which lands are gonna be a sacrifice zone, which lands are gonna, you know. It's
Tony, and I would also say, if actually one wanted to say a place that serves this community, it'd be Grand Junction. People go over there and shop, they use a hospital there, etc. I mean, I don't know where the boundaries should be, but you know, I'll stand by the boundaries I'm for, and you know, maybe we'll have to take a little vote on it, you know, whatever you call it, straw poll on it and see where people are at, and then.
no, in the interest of just keeping the conversation moving along, yeah, it's supposed to be the easy one. Let's just do a straw poll real quick on whether or not we like 75-mile alternative or just the county boundary and the zip code as it pertains to the definition of local area, which addresses employment. Specifically employment. Those in favor of the 75-mile route? Jerry? 3, 5, 5, 2, Long and Obi.
You don't know how many are gonna abstain, but yeah, I think it's 5-2.
And those in favor of the other one? For the record.
I mean, it's definitely appealing. That's a tough one for me. I see all your points, Obi, keeping the arrows pointed in. Yeah, I just.
Here we go.
The next one. Do we want to get into the 50% thing, Chrissy? Shall
I
we?
think that's the sticking point. I think that's the one that, other than that, it's pretty minimal conversation.
It's the large block of highlight, what is that? Section 2, A1.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
It's really a question, I've got it written down here somewhere, so for. So what does this 50% rule entail? This thing of some HOAs say that 50% of the folks have to be permanent residents. Is that why we're writing this? Some ways I'm asking, why are we writing this special thing for HOAs rather than saying something like?
Well, so there's alternatives, I guess.
Yes.
So my original, so at the workshop that happened a month ago, it was open it up.
Yeah.
So this was just a compromise to that. So because condos require 50% local or occupancy. And let's not get caught in the weeds here, I'm just explaining why. So the 50% came from a number that's associated with condos. So I was like, well, if 50% of them already have to be owner occupied, why not just incorporate that into loosening up the language that would allow outside ownership while keeping some available for purchase for locals. So the HOA would control that, and it would be outside of the county's sort of lease power because it would be controlled by the HOA. So people are getting hung up on the exception. The whole thing would be exempt, yes, because the HOA would be policing themselves and requiring 50% of their occupants to be owner occupied by our definitions within their own HOAs. That's the only way that this would be allowed, and it would be by an agreement between the entity, the development, and the county. And so that's where the language came from. And then people kind of liked it and kind of didn't, and then they hated the way I wrote it. So I rewrote it again to not incorporate HOAs at all, just to allow 50% to be purchased by outside of local area people. While the qualified household requirements for occupancy remained the same. And that's what this new alternative that's listed as III is supposed to do.
Christie, your alternative is written well, and that makes a lot more sense to me than what above it.
And I'm a little dense, so
Yeah.
help me out on this one.
Yeah.
You agreed too quickly though. What would be wrong? I'm wondering, I guess they have to make this requirement. What's wrong with saying, it's their business, you know, I guess some of these might be rental units, right? That's the problem. So it's their problem. That 80%, what if it was written 80% of the permanent residents had to be qualified, 20% not. They have to worry about having half of it do that at least, right? And then the rentals 80-20 also. Would that solve the problem?
That's if I'm understanding what you're saying,
Yes.
that's currently the way the HCHO ordinance is written.
Yes,
Yes, and you guys, and that is one of your alternatives, if that's what you guys want
that's
to do.
Alternatively, keep that.
Keep it as it is.
as it is. So that's what yours does at this point, the new one.
No, mine allows 50% of the HDHO units to be owned outside of.
80-20 was for
Yes.
2023.
80-20 was the deed restriction, and that will remain.
So I maybe I would, and I may not have clearly stated it because the version I just gave was that 80% of the permanent units had to be qualified owners.
Oh, instead of
And
50.
yeah, so why not 80% of the permanent units have to be, and 80% of the rental units have to be, then they'd be just like everybody else, except you've been able to, you know, say, well, some are being rented, so 80% should be, some are being owned, so 80% should be, because that's the 4/5 split that the HDHO does.
I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, so it basically is saying, I don't know what the, you know, the problems of the HDHO is they want to have 50% have to be permanent occupants, right? You can do that by saying 80% have to be qualified owners of property. And 20% can be
I think that's
not.
what the 2018 HDHO says. That's what we've already got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what they would.
Yeah,
want.
it says, yeah,
Yeah.
so only 20% currently can be bought, purchased.
Yep.
By anybody.
Yep.
And those can be lived in by anybody. They have to be rented for 30 days, they can't
Yep.
be overnight, but yeah.
Yes.
That's-
So what's wrong with that? How does that not meet the needs of HOAs and treat them just like anybody else?
I must assume that we tip the scales from 80-20 to 50-50 after lengthy deliberation in the housing task force. And I don't know, you've attended a few of them, Aaron, could maybe throw me a life jacket here and tell me how the conversation went when we talked about going from 80-20 to 50-50?
Well.
If you can remember, thank you, my man.
Let's see, I mean, I kind of said this before, we kind of had that subcommittee meeting. And I would kind of like to ask both of our commissioners, kind of the opposing viewpoints on this, because I think, there's room for, there's one poll that's like, no changes. And there's people on the planning commission that are like that. Then there's another side that's like, let's strip all restrictions. And I think there's arguments for
for and against that. But one of the things I would like to say to this body is I would really, if we could, give something that I would hope passes by a 7-7 vote for the county commission. That would show a real spirit of compromise on that. And I'd like to see ask, what we can do that was like, gives a little to this side, takes a little from that side and vice versa on that. And that's kind of where I'm at, because, we can pass something like, I think if we did it right now, it would just be like, yeah, no changes. And then we have a commission that'll just go over our head. And that makes the commission look bad, makes us look bad. I would like to actually have kind of a thing with that to see where we land. But that's my 2 cents about it.
Aaron, to your point though, and to OB's, this section here, all it deals with is owner. It
It's an
doesn't
exception
deal
for-
with 80% of them being qualified occupants or 10% being qualified. There is.
Does it provide maybe a little bit of clarification? I think that you guys are trying to lump two things into one, right? So there is the 80-20. So if I was to build 100 units, right, I could sell 20 to whoever I wanted, however I wanted, as long as they didn't go to Airbnb. 80% would still need to be owned by people who live here, right? We need to own them, but they could rent them to people that lived here. What we're talking about here is a separate issue, is that if I have those 80 units left over, I could allow someone else from outside of Grand County to buy that unit, but he would still have to rent that unit to people in Grand County.
You're talking
They would
about
still
ownership.
have to be qualified renters here in Grand County.
Yeah, that's ownership. Right.
Ownership, so what we're allowing here is we're allowing outside investors to help out with our affordable housing.
it doesn't help with the form, but here's what I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna say this to you too, Brian. This isn't, we're gonna banter this in a couple weeks, so I don't feel like the two of us should be saying anything.
Oh,
I'm saying that to you also, Brian, unless somebody asks us a question, I think you guys really need to banter this.
Aaron, does this is a question?
I do agree with you though, Aaron.
Yeah.
I think some compromise hopefully will send forward something that hopefully will be passed. That would be great. I don't wanna compromise, but hopefully those that just wanna give it away to outside investors, if there is some compromise, that hopefully they would see that there was some work done.
Ownership is wealth, right?
But I think
If we
we need to keep our mouth shut.
Thank you both
Like-
for helping out and providing the context and the backstory there. With all of the depth and respect in my heart, not gonna be letting anybody campaign in here today.
Yeah.
And sincerely, with all due respect, I need to just keep this one focused.
Yeah.
And so in the most plain form of language, and I appreciate the 30,000 foot view very well, and that ownership as well, but what the question in plain language right now is, when looking at the 80% of housing units that will be occupied in some way by a local resident, how many of that 80% should we allow to be purchased by someone from out of the area? That's the number I think we can throw them out, but what is a fair number to you? That 80% of the pie, we're gonna let outside investors buy some of them. How much is that number? This, as it is written, if we take Chrissy's edits in the center of the right, is 50/50. So theoretically, 40% of the units could be, of the total units, including the other, like all of them, 40% would be owned by someone in Cortez and occupied by
Tony, one of the things that Chrissy brought up in the last meeting was, she just threw that number out there as kind of a starting point. Like,
Yeah,
that was
so-
not proposed to be.
No, it
final.
was, it was just based on the requirements for condos. And I thought that it would be a simple number for people to comply with because it's already established.
Chrissy used a very thank you precedent is like, if it leans on precedent, I automatically love it. Sorry.
The one thing your thing you just said, the only thing I disagree with that is not necessarily, I come back to my previous little speech. I would like to give something that would show a reflection of the compromise that I think exists in the county commission. I propose a 60-40, which would roughly, 60-40, which would say that like
60 locally owned,
60
40,
non-locally owned.
60 non-locally owned.
Mhm.
Okay.
Even though personally, I would like to see it reversed, I would like to give something to the commission that's like reflects a compromise of where they all stand.
And I'd only say, I think we've got just two issues that you highlighted that, were kind of substantive issues. And I would like to present to the commission what we think is best, not off the wall. These are two issues only. I think the recommendations coming out right now is one that, a lot of commissioners will like. I don't know about this one, but I think we ought to give them our best shot, not to stick it to anybody at all, because that's not the way you want to do it. But this is what we think is best for the HDHO. I've lost on one of those, and I'm probably going to vote for whatever packet we have, because I think it needs to go in front of the county commission. Although I would ask that it be reported to them that there was some dissent around particular issues.
Absolutely.
It's not atypical. I'm going to say, I don't see why HOAs are special.
Well, the HOA language is removed.
The HOA language is special, and you can make it so, just like if you were renting all the units and you happen to have a place, you say, well, it's 80-20, right? If you are an HOA, if you were a developer, if you were a HOA, if you were a regular developer and you were selling all the properties, it'd be 80-20. But this is kind of
the copy we have in front of us though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The I version doesn't incorporate HOAs, it's just, all the HDHO.
Yeah, we took that out.
Yeah, so all of them, so now it covers everybody.
Everybody, yes, that's, yeah.
And I'm really not comfortable with that.
Aaron?
Mary brought up a good point the last time we had in this. It was like, well, people have bought into this as it was written. And, they kind of like, they signed up for this. I thought about that, Mary, and I think there's a lot of points to that. However, I feel like I do have to flesh out this argument for it to be aired out. Some people that started the HDHO thought that there was no local ownership requirement on that. So I would just kind of like to hear kind of the counterpoint to that, because some people bought into it thinking that they were like, oh no, we can sell these to sell.
Developers, you mean, bought into it with knowing there was no local ownership?
Yes. And then there was all these lawsuits. And so it's like that argument stands, but then it's like, then there's this whole
Plat
other.
was not recorded.
What's that?
They could have pulled their plat.
Yeah.
Final plat is not recorded
Great counter.
at that point. And I do think that needs to be clarified, because what happened with the appeal process happened before final plat. So at that point, those developers still could have pulled out, just to, make sure that we have all the information. Because I do think that is an important point that maybe has been lost. And even at that point, and I know that there was a lot of, there is money that goes into development, and there's an application fee and there's impact, like those things are paid. And that would have been lost, but they went forward. So
past the lawsuit, they still bought in.
But it was an
argument.
appeal.
Yeah.
Like it just went through the appeal process with.
It was something I really wanted to hear, because I heard that side of this argument too. I was like, well, that's a point,
Yeah, so all of the phases for that were recorded happened after, like all of the final plat phases happened after we went to
After the
through the appeal
clarification.
process, yes. And so there was one, after that happened, there was one additional appeal that went to, after the appeal process, there was one additional lawsuit that was, or claim that was filed in district court. And then there was a settlement associated with that one, with an amended master plan. And that was on one of the properties, and so keep that in mind.
Interestingly, none of those people came to the hearings and brought the issue, brought their concerns up.
Yeah, and they probably will go to the commission, at the commission meeting, it's hard to say. But I just to clarify that, I just want to make sure that that part's understood, that final plat was recorded after that.
I'm gonna
Sorry.
start to narrow the scope of the conversation a little bit. What is in front of us? We have 2I and 3I, right? 2I was the older language. You clarified a bunch of that. I think we can just scratch that. Like, physically, don't read that. Stop it. Don't get confused.
2I.
2I.
Bye.
Scratch that out.
Bye.
Goodbye.
You're
Now
welcome.
there's 3I. And this is the question, the number we really want to settle on. Up to blank percent of the ownership interest in a property may be held by individuals who do not qualify as an actively employed household. How high should that number be? Everything else in this is great. It's got the qualified household, the primary residence, the deed restriction, like it's all in there. The question is, understanding the reality that this number will get set, to Aaron's point, not tonight, but a week from now or 2 weeks from now, whenever they have their meeting.
Next Tuesday.
Thank you. Ooh. We need to have a number in there. Aaron proposed 60. I think Obi proposed 20. Right, because you were saying to keep it at 20, right? So. Do we want to straw poll 60 and 20?
Well,
Like,
so let's clarify before we do that.
yeah,
And so let's say you have a development HDHO with 100 units.
Hmm.
We're saying 50% or whatever,
No.
for example, 50%. So in other words,
No.
50 of these.
no. This applies to the 80% that isn't just gonna get sold to anybody. Remember that.
But
You
that's not,
develop
that's not what this says.
50% of the ownership interest in a property designated under this section may be held by individuals.
In an HDHO development designated under this section. I read that as 50% of the entire group. Am I wrong?
Jerry brought up that point, and it's like a nuance that I wouldn't have caught, for sure.
And if,
Yes,
that- and if that's the case, you can scratch 20% off right away. Because they're gonna be gone,
It's
right? So, yeah, Tony, I think it's worth reconciling that.
That was in.
Yeah.
I've been out of service since 5
I could be wrong, Tony, but let's grind that into, just so we know what we're talking about, let's
Yeah, yeah,
grind
yeah.
this to some conclusion.
Development designated under this section.
It's a very minor.
Yeah. So does it? I want to like loud and clear on the record, the spirit of this language is that this applies only to the 80% that's of the pie that's left behind under the entire HDHO development.
I read it as applying to the entire HDHO development.
Thank
50% can be owned, and that would include the 20, obviously.
Yeah.
So it would be 30% of the remaining 80 could be purchased by outside, leaving.
Which would be 24 out of 80 in the case of bond.
Is that the understanding that the conversation that the housing task force was working with too? Is that it like that?
I don't think we went into it like that.
Gotcha.
We're gonna.
Well, and there's no way to separate those, just so you guys know, with the language, with the way that an ordinance reads, there's no way for me to talk about 80% of, I could say 50% of deed restricted HDHO. I could add deed restricted to this language, and that would make it 50% of the 80, so 40%, so.
But
But it's a good catch.
that is a great catch. Thank you, Jerry. I tend to like specifying that this ratio applies to the deed restricted HDHO units. And the way I look at it, the 20% is already an incentive. That's a number not gonna change. That's a wash. That's not on the table. I would think I was told very specifically in our 6 weeks ago that I'm not even supposed to touch the 80-20 off the top. So let's specify this applies to these deed restricted units, not the free market units. Thank you. So that's
That simplifies the math.
it simplifies the math a lot. You don't get into like the overlays thing in the world, but that's what everything's trendy and fashionable now, so overlays. It's what's the it's planning vote. And to that point, 20, 60, 50.
Yeah, I think that 50, like reading it, how we were just saying, that is a big, let's say I went with my proposal of a 60-40 on that would bump up that 80%, another 10%.
Yep.
So.
I don't know, I feel like, what was the point of the HCHO? Mary, you had really good points on this last meeting.
I feel like this ordinance has been vetted from the very first moment it was written. I feel like Obi was a part of that, and I
Not the government
respect,
part.
and I respect that he's still wanting to keep it as is for that reason, because he was a part of it. He understood it. It was vetted, that wasn't written in a day. It won an award, so obviously it was written well, and everybody that had read it was in the planning section department and voted on it to be awarded. And I feel like people, it's like me going through a zone change, and then when I get there, I go, I really don't want this. I think I need more units. So I come to the county and say, hey, I can't sell them because I'm not getting enough units. I think it was written well, and I respect it, and I don't want to remove any of the integrity.
I feel like it was a compromise for developers already by giving them a huge density bonus. And now we're compromising on a compromise.
And the whole county had to buy in. This isn't just developers, and the neighbors hate it, so kind of feel bad for them.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. I'm not running for anything, so.
I guess the only reason, Mary, that I see some benefit to putting some percentage of these as open for sale, still used by qualified households, but open for sale that the general market is, we'll get more of them.
Well, and I'll tell you, Chrissy has explained that to me, and I understood it after she explained it to me. I mean, it took her 3 times. It wasn't the first one. I had to listen to her 3 times. And, so I kind of understand why it's a good compromise.
Yeah.
But I'm going with Obi. And Obi was there. He knew what was going on. And if you're there and you're helping write it and you're through that whole process and you've been through the months and the hundreds of public hearings, I'm sure it wasn't easy. Unless there's something there that has to happen. I mean, if it were to help the community, 100%, but I don't know that selling it to somebody in Colorado is really except for they can sell.
I mean, it's one thing that somebody let's say in Montana, somebody from Montana buys one of these and they can only rent to a qualified household. They're not gonna leave it there empty forever. They can't use it.
That's right.
So eventually, if it doesn't rent, they lower the rate until it does. And
It's a good idea.
it's gonna happen.
And also, instead of like aggressively trying to change all this minutia, why don't you advertise this to the local workforce? How many people actually know that this is a thing? I didn't before I was on planning commission. No idea.
I don't know if that's like part of our response.
Not ours, but I'm,
No.
who's trying to
No,
change
right,
this
right.
then?
No.
Change it.
And I feel that way too. The developers are the ones that are supposed to be making this
Yeah.
work.
I do,
Controls it.
I do hear things where it's like, there's this, these guys spend a lot of time, but time has passed, we got new things. Like the whole financing thing was because we didn't know about it, right? And so that, I think we're all on 100% consensus.
And I don't, it is the one part of the HDHO that I think people didn't foresee. It was the financial part, this thing that eventually, at first, developers understandably said, we can't get finances for this, so we can't build them, and it's one of the reasons lots of things didn't get built.
And they hated the whole thing.
Right,
Or a lot of it.
but, and now I'm gonna shut up because I interrupt you, but I agree with you on that.
My concern with this is if you open up the ownership to, let's just say Californians, because we all love California. So Californians buy out this percent and they rent them to locals. But like, the thing that I don't know, and this is a political decision, is like, okay, Gavin Newsom buys an HDHO. Now the price that, let's say it's Murphy Flats, they're going for $250 because Gavin Newsom can buy one for one now. Did the price go up $280, $320? I don't know. Like we can't know that number. And then a local is like, oh man, I could afford $250, but now it's $320, and now I can't buy them, and it inhibits local ownership. That's my concern about opening it up to non-local ownership. That is my concern.
Totally.
I share all of your concerns personally, in principle. I feel some trepidation about trying to look into our crystal ball and figure out what the housing market is going to do in the next 5 years. I don't think I want to weigh that variable quite as much in my calculus. Interest rates are the same as they were a year and a half ago. The number here about it is really the point of this is to make the financial incentive exist so that the development gets built. And I don't know that much about development financing, but I know those apartments next to the cell phone tower and Sherry Griffith out there in Arroyo Crossing filled up instantly, and their rents. And I know those are all local working families filled up instantly. Casa Doorknob has a lot more to do with the financial feasibility of a development than, I think our appetites for luxury have gotten a little bit out of hand. And I think when we build certain things and we try to make it affordable, but it can't be affordable because, of a certain kind of standard. So I mentioned that to say that I don't really feel a ton of oh, poor baby sympathy for the development side of the conversation. Other than the fact that we need to start getting these things built because there is an appetite. And I don't really know how to reconcile that, given that I haven't stocked this toolbox with tools. It was gifted to me, and these are the tools that we have. And so we're talking about this number. Is it 45? Is it 40? you know? Um,
Yeah, we knew this would be a hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm into proposing to keep some of them for local ownership. So people,
Oh,
those
yeah.
markets are protected for local ownership, and that is why I'm against
I would,
getting rid of, just getting rid of all the thing
I-
requirements.
I would,
So
you know,
I
we
keep some in-
suggest, do we all agree that match remove the ownership requirement entirely? We wanna have some set aside for,
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I think it's
Let's
an agreement that we want to get rid of II and the bottom of
the other alternative,
Well, is Mary and are you in agreement with that or no?
Anybody actually wanna remove ownership requirements entirely? Keep
My
that?
only thought, and it's just. We have empty units for many reasons, not necessarily because of this. But. If, say we do 60-40, and. The local ownership is occupied or vice versa. The outside ownership is occupied and we're not occupying those other ones because of this restriction. Are we going to continue to have empty units because of this percentage? That's really, this is where my biggest heartburn has been, because if we're playing devil's advocate, and let's say a corporation who has a business here who employs a lot of people wants to buy some of those units for employee housing because they can't build employee housing. But that percentage has already been met. And they can't acquire more because of the local ownership percentage. Like, this is where my mind is like, how do we keep units from sitting unoccupied if there's a demand for selling these units that isn't necessarily local ownership, but it's local employment? Because at the end of the day, these are for local employment.
Yeah.
But if it's an outside corporate, like a grocery store.
But if they're serving the local area, which a grocery store is, they're allowed to purchase.
Megan, I think what you're
Okay, so-
talking about, I think it's like we have the empty units like in Murphy Flats. I think the lendability was the main
Right.
problem with that.
Right, and in watching the workshop, I was trying to see all sides of it, from the opening it up, from restricting it, from everything in between, but that answers my question, because it's like, if we can't build affordable housing, but these units are available, but it wouldn't necessarily be this owner occupied situation.
Yeah, so that was, I think, a little bit of the confusion, like, a business can always purchase things and always has been. And that was something that, I think got a little bit confused at the beginning of HDHO, but a business can purchase these and always has been able to, as long as they're serving local.
Okay, that's where my big hang up was, because it's like, if we've met that percentage, but we have empty units on the flip side of this, either way, how do we fill these units? Because at the end of the day, my goal in making my decision is we fill these units so we have employed families who have homes here.
Well, and another number just to keep in mind, I don't wanna get in the weeds, but we have 100 and, sorry, 98. We have about 150 units coming online for just rental in the next year.
Which makes the ownership side of this.
Just rental, they're just rental units, so they're not going to be sold at all.
Are they built?
34 of them are built, almost, they don't have a certificate of occupancy, the 98 are.
So you're saying there's like a solid pool of rentals in the market in there?
And they're approved, one of them is an apartment complex, so they can be sold, one of them is townhomes that they're not selling their own.
And they're HDHO.
That's just throwing that out there.
I
Just
think
throwing-
that's a good data point, actually, in the context of the unavoidable crystal ball of the housing market, that's not actually going to give us very much.
Tony, can I ask a quick clarifying
Yeah,
question,
right.
just from the subcommittee? talking to Megan's point that she had, that we had talked about, and Trish can tell me if I'm wrong on this. We had talked about, I think it was something like, units had to be occupied, was it 9 months out of the year? For anything, was that just for businesses, or does that apply to all rental units? What was the conversation?
Yes, I remember this,
Is that, did that make it into the language or not?
It's not, it's never been a part of HDH.
So I know, but there was something that we were talking about adding in.
Yes, and that, it was not added because there's nothing in the language that told people they had to do it, so we couldn't retroactively enforce that on any. So it would be illegal, yeah, so we couldn't enforce something additional, we could.
Chris, I could actually on the data point. So there's going to be 170 some units that will be, and what was the limit for the HDHO when they finally cut it off? Was it?
302 could.
300,
I think
yeah.
it was 302.
That's interesting.
No, 300, maybe 313.
So
You know, interesting, Tony, the one thing I might have said is one alternative that's not here is strike it. Because that's actually probably what I'm arguing for.
Right here.
Oh, does it say keep as is? And that means strike it. Yeah, okay. That's probably what I'm for.
Straw polling, I agree with that.
And Aaron's going.
The only problem that I see with striking Obi is that we might get something, then we leave it to the commission. And they're gonna give a 4-3 vote, like that takes it all out. And so that's why I'm a big advocate of finding a good compromise that works for each one, because I think at the end of the day, or not at the end of the day, some of the things, Megan, that you were saying about getting units filled. Sometimes I think it's important to have units filled with people that own their places, because these may be the only places that a person making $20-25 an hour can afford.
Right.
And it would be, we're cutting back on that market. And I seriously wonder in this country about ownership is fleeting this country. And we need to think about future generations having buy-in, or this country is gonna have a lot of problems. Because they are not gonna be bought in to markets. And it's upon local planning commissions, I think, to preserve some of this. Or, I mean, you know, we're gonna have Chinkaveri, t-shirts and things.
I'd only add one quick thing. 170 out of 300 units have been built with this 80% requirement. I wouldn't bet that the rest aren't going to be built, or some people have fully dropped out. If you read it, you wouldn't get people who wanted to do HDHO under the current financing that would be willing to have 80% ownership of locals.
So I think, yeah, also Megan, like, do you just want people to get in there to rent so they can work here? Or do you want to build, like, the locals here that work here and serve the community to also, like, have a chance at building wealth? And like, if you
Well-
own something versus renting something, it's a big difference.
Ownership, I will always be for, because I commuted for 5 years before I moved here, and I moved here through the HASU program. So I am 100% for that. What I'm saying is, if we know Murphy Flats is a lendability issue, but say it wasn't a lendability issue, say we just had these units that we couldn't get into because of restrictions or because of this percentage that's in place.
Are we dealing with that though? Does that have a problem?
What do you mean?
Like,
I'm just trying to play out scenarios of this, like I was trying to play out any possible scenario of if we happen to meet one side of this percentage, just say we do.
So I want to point out that when the phrase lendability issue comes up, lendability issues are not unique to HDHO at all. So I would be hesitant to blame Fannie and Freddie for the reason HDHO failed at all. That's not, I mean. If you want the truth, it's the fact that people in my generation, student loans are so high that the DTI can never get brought down to somewhere reasonable. That's what it is, okay? So that's that. And so that's not unique to HDHO. That problem, the lendability issue, is conventional mortgages, USDA, Schedule 40. It's ubiquitous. I think that when we see vacant units, whether or not they're being sold and it's a lendability issue, or whether or not they're being rented and they're vacant because the developer can't sell them to. I want to be sensitive to a needful community, but we cannot do anything with this ordinance that guarantees those units will be filled. That's not what we're doing here. We're on the planning side of things. The conversation after the C of O is issued and the thing's been built, that's the free market. That's America, right? What we're doing here is on the side of the conversation before the thing gets built. How many are we going to let get sold to California? It seems pretty clear to me that that is a greater than zero number. It's already 20%.
Already great too.
It's already 20%. It's a greater than 20% number of the total size of the development. So I'm gonna ask us again. Another 20%, another 60%. I strongly like Aaron's point. And maybe I'm just tired of all this. But I would love to see some kind of compromise that actually gets us on the same page with the county commission at least once. There is absolutely no reason to throw out all of the hard work that the task force did and all the conversations that went into this, and then just let them write whatever the heck they want anyway. Which is what will happen.
That's. In my opinion, I think that's no matter what if we're gonna make any changes, it's like. We're the advisory board, right? In my experience, I don't think there's gonna be any compromise.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Like one of the big things that Tracy's in most of those meetings is, and I still hear it all the time, we're supposed to be following our advisory boards. So I'm hearing it all the time. So to me, if they're not, it's hypocritical. So I'm hoping there will be some, that's what they keep saying, so let's do it. And we have a really good board here, a very, to me, diverse, interactive, bantering board.
And we serve the people of Grant County.
Right.
Correct. I like the 60-40. I think that it's a good starting place to offer some kind of compromise in this situation.
I think we got enough different opinions here that we're not gonna come to one number and we're gonna have to just see if we can come to something that all of us can live with. But I brought this up before, really my only thought is, if we make it easier for these things to be sold, we're gonna get more. And we have a housing.
We're gonna get what? Sorry.
We're gonna get more of them. And we have a housing problem. I would love to see people spending their money to help our qualified households have a place to live. And it'll be things like people's parents, it's not gonna just be the horrible ghoul from California. It's gonna be people's parents and aunts and uncles and whatever too, right? But in the end, opening up ownership, I'm not saying occupancy, that's nailed down, we're not changing that. Opening up ownership will help developers have more confidence and we're gonna get more product built.
Just to clarify, make sure you guys all understand this, everything has sunsetted, so no new developments are coming from this. Yeah, it's expired.
It's only what's out there in the pipeline.
Yeah, already what's approved and has a final plat associated with it. There was a couple, or at least one development, their final plat on their last phases lapse. So that reverts to the underlying zoning. And only what's vested in the final plat that's been reported, can be built and sold and whatever. So keep that in mind, just, I wanna make sure that
I
that's.
would like to say, that's not to say that, oh, hey, this program, we like it, let's unsunset it. I mean, a commission could do that.
That's what the commission is doing with this.
No, but no.
But what we're probably gonna do with this then, Chrissy, is keep some of those that haven't been built from expiring. That would be the best case, right?
My understanding is that they've sunsetted, they had the development agreement, it
That's approved.
existed, they had this amount of, certain amount of months to get things done, they weren't done. I guess that there is room to open up negotiation on those development agreements, but there wouldn't be new HHOs coming online from this.
Then
This was-
why, that's a bit of fundamental thing, but why are we editing an expired ordinance?
So that's always been my question too. That's why I had such a hard time with a lot of this, with creating a new deed restriction so that people.
I just like that, the entire point of this exercise was that you're going to turn HDHO back on, right?
No, because we had a couple commissioners that wanted to.
So this is opening up ownership, so this is like essentially, affecting the rules and regulations. It does change, it will, when people enter into the deed restriction that I presented last time, it does allow them through this land use code, which are adjusting.
So, okay, so this is
Just
going
about
to,
self-
I need very specific clarification. These changes will affect exactly how many units? 130?
Well, it would,
Is it still the same map?
That's the geographic area. I mean, like, how many actual units are we talking about here? Because we're having this debate over 400 houses.
Less than
Well,
3 because of the ones that
There
are
is a
already
new,
built.
there is a new bill with like the state has made its own HDHO bill. And I think part of the commission wants to be like, should we choose the state's one or should we choose our local one? And I think that's kind of in the
They need to
background.
make that decision then.
Yeah.
But one of the things that, when it went to 50%, that was an arbitrary number
Right.
from Chrissy.
Well, it wasn't entirely arbitrary. There was
Well,
precedent with
But that's the
condominiums.
reason why. It
But-
was, what the number that any one person looked at and decided, well, this is why.
I also do want to like,
well, this is.
that data point really should drive our passion for a moment. What is the maximum number of housing units that may be bought by Californians if the number is 50%? Because this only affects the existing vested units, right? So we have a definitive number. Right? This isn't like
And then-
all future HDHOs because the HDHO.
They would have to opt in.
And then they have to opt in. So like,
So 253, there are 253 vested HDO deed restricted units that were approved through the HDHO program. 98 and 34 of those are rentals only. The rest of them,
Chrissy.
98 and 34 were rentals only. They're apartment complex, and then there's townhomes. Those townhomes technically could be sold, so, at this point, that 34 looks like it's going to just be rentals, along with the 98. It's just going to be rentals.
Out of 253?
253 are deed restricted, 313 total units.
253 are deed restricted.
And
So.
I'm only giving you the deed restricted
And,
numbers.
these rules we're going over right now would change the rules for them.
And
And
only
that's
that.
That's why I say like,
So
what is the issue of?
Well, unless they open it back up and then it would apply to any new,
Yeah.
and we would have
I-
to, put the overlay back in, it would go through the zoning process, like.
Yeah, it would all over again, but this moment in time, we're talking about, do we Do we allow 125 housing units or 80 housing units to be bought by Californians? Are the real numbers we're talking about? Just for like, this is how much time we're spending on 80 or 120 or, you know.
And does it also mean that folks that have sold 80% of the units to locals who are, I'm sorry, actively employed households now could go back and say, well, we can get rid of some of those because now we're allowed to have 50% of those or whatever the number is? If they could, can they go back and change?
This, a local who currently owns it could sell it to an outside entity, yes. If we change it
Up to a total of whatever this
to
number.
whatever the
magic
number that you
number
guys come up
is.
with.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't only, I mean, it immediately applies to the ones that are on the open market. It would actually apply to everything that's vested. It would actually apply to these 253 units. This number will apply to that. This 50% or 100% or 80% or whatever you guys decide would affect these 253 HDHO units in a real way.
So yes, that's I think a lot of, at least my understanding of the conversation had been driven by maybe my presumption that this ordinance was going to affect all future HDHO proposals. That dramatically changes the context of the conversation.
But Tony, it sounds like if I'm getting it right, it means that we could actually kind of go have a regression, the number that are owned by locals. Yes, there might be 80% of these things owned by locals now. And there won't have to be, so we'll go backwards on this.
Is that actually the way it would work, or would certain units be deed restricted to local ownership and others not?
All the units are deed restricted.
To local ownership.
To local lot.
But my question was ownership.
Well, that's the number we're coming up.
Well, what, so,
Percent or 80%.
yeah, but here. yeah,
It
I
wouldn't be,
understand
it
the
wouldn't
question.
be, it wouldn't be to the property. It could be, it would be up to the developer. Typically with something like this, it's the first come, first served,
Right,
would how it would work.
that's what I was thinking.
Good profit.
So I guess my thought on this, Chrissy, was a developer's got X number of units that he's for sale. The deed actually, if they sold this to someone outside of the area, sold the ones going outside go first, the ones local ownership would go second. The deed would be restricted on those ones that went second to local ownership owner.
I think there would be deed restrictions on both. They would look a little different, and I didn't want to throw those in front of you to confuse the issue. It would be that's why I pulled the deed restriction out, so you guys didn't have to look at it. So that's why there's that language that I proposed at EC that talks about the owner must execute and record a legally binding agreement with the county.
And
Confirming, and then within that, it would be sold back to a qualified household, depending on what's available. So those 50 could be evolving.
I'm gonna double down on the guidance that we're not advisory body to the county attorney. I have no idea how to get into that conversation and we should leave it alone.
But the thing is, it's important to understand how this works.
Yes, but as far as the text of the restrictions, that's not really what the question is. for
Well,
us right
that's-
now.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
that was the reason for my question to Chrissy is, let's say that I don't intend to live in one of these, but I go out and I buy one and I rent to a qualified household. 10 years from now, I want to sell it. Am I free to sell that same unit to anybody?
Not
Or,
necessarily,
yeah,
depends on what's available.
so that really increases risk for the buyer, doesn't it? If they're one of these outside buyers, outside owners.
I mean, I guess it depends on. I mean, a deed restriction on a property automatically lowers the value no matter what the deed restriction
Yeah, it
says. So, I mean, I'm not gonna be able to say that, but That part of the conversation is sort of, that's part of their due diligence. And it really has nothing.
It creates kind of a wild dynamic in the market where if you have 3 of these things for sale, for example, 2 of them for sale, for example, one is owner's qualified household, the other one is owner is whoever, Montana resident, whatever. They're both on sale at the same time. In theory, the first buyer that could come in could snag, could become a non-resident. They could rent to a qualified household. The other one would have to sit there and wait for a qualified household.
Yeah. I mean, but that's what that's what capitalism is based on, right? Welcome to America.
That's kind of.
That's a weird dynamic, isn't it?
I think one of the reasons I was hesitant to propose this language is because of things like this. Like it was a weird thing to wrap my head around. That's why I had the HOA involved. That's why I removed it from the county at all. So,
I
sorry.
wonder if the commission appreciates that dynamic being brought in.
The commission hasn't even seen this language, so it's hard to, they're probably not. I don't know. I have no idea what they're gonna do.
I'm gonna have to say conversation with them.
I grew up in very rural Appalachia. It's the largest city I've ever lived in. And in my middle school, one of my civics teachers, his name was Trent Bryden. He was a wildlife conservation officer in the summertime. And he introduced me to what I've taken to calling raccoon questions, because the kid brought a raccoon to school and kept it in his gym locker for the entire week of class. No, it wasn't me. And so Trent Bryden, kind of being like the school's go get that skunk in the football field guy, had to deal with this. And then he came back to class and he gave us this rule. You're not allowed to bring raccoons to school anymore. And then all the hands went up immediately. Excuse me, Mr. Bryden, what if a raccoon sneaks into my backpack and I did not know that the raccoon was there? Am I still gonna get in trouble? Right? These are raccoon questions.
Yes.
Yeah, and we can go down that rabbit hole and find a million different ways that this pays to work. Because it's an overlay. And I don't think, anyway. It's just what's vogue in the planning world now. We do serve the people of Grant County. We also have a constituency of other voices, a plurality of opinions that have gone into this. We've got some really intelligent, well-crafted scribes pinning down what we need. There, to reiterate, will be at least 20% of these units that are going to be bought by Californians. We are being asked to increase that number. People who know more about their own interests, developers, lenders, are telling me that this is a good idea. I don't know, but we have a bit of an obligation to trust, I think, a process, a task force, I don't know enough about this to say that any of those other voices are wrong, even if I think they're suspicious. So, guys, what's the number gonna be? I'm gonna tell you right now, I like the precedent that Chrissy used with the 50-50. That's how condominiums work. You can point to it, it's nearby, but it's not too close, right, of an analogy. So I would say this number in this text should be 30. That way, half of the units must be owned by locals. And half of the units, either deed restricted or not, will probably be bought up by Texas. Right, but 50-50 is right where I want to be. 50, putting this number at 30 makes the entire development 50-50.
30% of the deed restricted.
So
30% of
49 and 51.
I can,
Yeah.
I'll give in on that. If it could be a whole consensus commission, I think that would be pretty cool. I'd easily cave in on that idea immediately.
50-50 precedent is good. I'm trained to always think about how I'm going to have to like defend my decision in front of a judge, and being able to point out another similar thing and say, well, this number works for them, is rock solid stuff. So, I don't know.
So 2 changes to the wording. Number 1 is, instead of saying 50% of the units, it would be the deed restricted units.
Yes,
And then number 2 would be changing the 50 to a 30.
those are the 2 changes I have on my copy.
So I wrote down 30% of the deed restricted units. And that will go into the regular.
Yes.
I'm probably going to vote against this, and it'll be in part because yes, there are the developers, people have to sell this, people have to finance it. And there's also the local workers and people who want to get ownership actually for themselves. And we heard from one pretty solidly, that's the nice thing about workshopping these things with the public coming in and saying, so what do you think the number ought to be? If we're going to increase density in your area, you think it should be 50-50, 80-20, 20-80? So the one thing, of course, I will ask, especially if there's anybody else who votes with me on this, is this, it should be recorded probably this number wasn't, there was debate about this number.
Mm-hmm.
And the issues really are ownership for locals.
And I mean, this meeting is being recorded.
Yep.
It's available on YouTube.
Yep.
And it's the county commission's prerogative to do their homework and listen to our voices. We are advisory only.
To that point too, can Chrissy, in the written minutes, can you record the straw poll results from?
Yeah, I wrote them down.
And we're still deliberating and do plan on taking another straw poll so that we can keep track of changes made on this copy here, so vote and not know what we're voting. Laura, sorry, yeah.
No, you're good. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna budge on it. I think we should keep it as is. The intention of this HEHO to me appears that it's to give people that live here and work here a chance to build their lives. And it was already a compromise for the developers to get a bunch of extra units. And again, I'm just gonna say, it sounds like a compromise on top of a compromise, and I think we should just leave it the way it is. And I understand you guys want to compromise with the county, but I just.
For the record, I think you are morally in the right on this one.
Then why would you vote? I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm just like, the principle, if you are a servant of the community, you should vote on the principles.
Right? I would,
I think one of my principles there is compromise.
Okay.
So
That's
that's.
that's what keeps us diverse, like that, I appreciate that.
No, I'm in agreement with you, but it's kind of.
I mean, as long as it's on the record, like morally, that's how we all are, but we're gonna compromise because we want, yeah, like,
yeah, this
on the
is,
record.
I just think if there was anything to have a full consensus thing, it'd be a good message that we really on that, and that would be my only appeal to.
And I feel that since the developers have already bought into this, they've all bought into it, none of them have said no, they're all purchased this document. And it did go to court, and apparently they did win. So there's good wording here, and I feel like keeping it as is, as much as I appreciate what Chrissy did, and as much time She's gonna make me understand it. I'm older and wiser. And I'm
Word.
That third one is my go-to.
We've all heard this from our mothers.
So,
I have just one other comment too, and that is. I've been operating under the assumption that this is not gonna be sunset forever, that it's coming back. Now, that may or may not be correct, and that's not the situation we have to deal with today, is it?
I don't think it can.
I don't think you should, yeah, I don't think you should do it that way. I mean, that would,
Original ordinance was.
yeah, no, it wasn't designed for that. And so I think that if that's something that the commission wants to happen, it would have to be rewritten with new numbers and new dates or new units, because it was approved by the public with these limits. We can't get rid of those limits, so. And those limits were met.
They can rewrite a new one.
Yeah, I mean, even the ordinance only allowed, it was, I think, 340 units. It was very close to what was vested. And the sunset date happened we were within, throwing distance of the number. And the number was specific, and it was what made the ordinance keep the market low, keep the pool for locals to purchase, to keep that number low. And that number was specific to the ordinance at the time, so, sorry.
so again, we're talking about an impact to no more than, you said, 253 deed restricted units.
Is there more things that we need to address, or is it, you ready for a motion?
I don't know if we're ready for a motion yet. I see a little bit more highlight, but first I'd like to kind of straw poll whether or not we like 30% of an ownership interest in deed restricted HDHO development, or if we want to keep it as is. People for keeping it as is Obi, Long, and Mary. People at 30%.
I'm gonna hesitantly agree.
Yeah, and for the record. I with Jerry, hesitantly agree, Mary has very strong points, Laura has very strong points. We, yeah,
That's
this is
strong.
not the thing that I.
Yeah,
It's put in front of me.
it's been taken.
It's just what's in front of us, guys.
There's a whole other public hearing coming out, council, so you might get something from the public, like, for the change it too. That has happened so many times on ordinances. Planning commissions changes don't mean anything, except it's up. Offers better.
I was gonna ask you, Chrissy, when you said next meeting, but it's the public.
Yeah, the next meeting is the public.
There's one last little bit of highlight here.
That was
Chrissy.
residual, that was left over.
Oh, that's left over, so we don't actually need to look at that.
Yeah, the one thing that we do that I would encourage you to just look at is the enforcement language that was sort of contentious last meeting. That we're on the-
Investigation and enforcement on the last page.
No, it's at. I didn't highlight it, I'm sorry. It's at,
Oh,
4-7-11. Maybe with 3 pages. Well, no, but-
yeah, 4711, and it would just be the legal action section.
This was the one we talked about, satisfy Ronnie.
And I mentioned at the beginning, I just wanna make sure everyone, cause that is different from the last one you looked at. So I just wanted to point it out because it's slightly different and it just speaks to an injunctive sort of
Yeah.
situation where we'd have to go to court. We couldn't just.
Yeah, if Ronnie's happy with that, I also. In my civics mind, like that, we're asking a judge to carry out an eviction proceeding and not. Evicting people on an administrative process, just in general, that's
Yeah.
the way it should be.
Right.
So,
And The language just said, not limited to, so this is just, it just specifies that it would be, an injunction from
That's,
the court.
yeah, if Franny and Fetty like that. You know, if why we can't.
Right.
Cool, in that case, we're really looking at to just review, seeking a motion to send a favorable or unfavorable recommendation of the HO ordinance as we have edited. Those two edits being, where are they? That the local area will be the political boundary of Grand County, the political boundary of the 84532 zip code, or is otherwise within 75-mile area. Then the other edit will be on that section 3, the deed restrictions. So up to 30% of the ownership interest in a deed restricted HDHO development is the way I have that language.
I have 30% of the deed restricted units. Notwithstanding the requirements of 4.7.13, up to 30% of deed restricted units in an HDHO development designated under this section may be held by individuals who do not qualify as an actively employed household, provided that blah, 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 blah.
Not to derail us here, and I know I'm gonna be the guy who's asking a dumb question, and I hate myself sometimes. The copy that I read used the text ownership interest. The most recent copy that you're working on says number of units. That is a patently different thing, an ownership interest and an actual whole integral unit. And so did we intentionally want to not get into the weeds with what an ownership in that one?
That was the reason that I did.
Cool.
That happened in the middle of the night, and I don't know why it did get up,
It's okay.
So,
So, yeah, patently different, but we're talking about 30% of the
units, complete units, not.
it's not it. Cool, so I will entertain a motion to send any form of recommendation to the county commission on that ordinance as edited.
That we sent a favorable recommendation to the county. This amended ordinance as edited or as noted by you.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Adding seconds, all in favor? 2, 4, 4, 3, Long, for the record, Long, Bobby and Mary in opposition. That's the word. Very good, so, moving on. What's next? Feature. Oh, geez, it is 6:25. I'm so sorry. I should have done a public comment a long time ago, but we can open it up for. I didn't realize you were on. Oh, hi, Courtney. Can you hear us?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, of course. Please, floor is yours. I'm sorry we took a while on that one.
No, that's okay. And I have a few responses for y'all. I know it doesn't affect the vote that you just made, but I do want to share these thoughts because I know the commission will be listening to this meeting. So the first thing that I think is really important to note is that FHA specifically denied this deed restriction, the language in the deed restriction. And the reason that's important to the HDHO program is that FHA loans are some of the most critical loans for locals because they require the lowest money down. So it's the best way to get locals in-house. So it's still really important to us to get that FHA verbiage fixed, which I think will be passed along to the commission. Also, this wouldn't be a conversation if the program was working in its current iteration. We've had C of O on all of our units for 1.5 years. We market in every possible way I can imagine. So if anybody hasn't heard of these units, please come take a look and please tell everyone you know, open to ideas. And at the end of the day, yes, we want to fill empty units. We've turned away dozens of people who are undeniably part of our community that haven't met the minutia of the current code for one reason or another. It's been heartbreaking to turn people away over and over again. Several of our non-restricted units we've dropped the price on and sold to people that I strongly believe should have met the HTHO. We thought it was more important to get them into our community than to simply tell them no. This is not just about selling units right now. We also need to think about the longevity of the success of these units, and we need to make sure that the people that have bought them individually have a reasonable pool of people to sell to, a reasonable pool of local workforce. At the end of the day, opening up the definition of the AEH is the most important thing from our experience. And again, there've just been individuals that continue to slip through the cracks that have lived here for years, decades even. The ownership impetus for us comes from several local retirees that have wanted to buy units and rent them to locals, but the code does not allow for those retirees to own units. So if there's some way that the commission can figure out that we can somehow make it to where at least locals of all different types, shapes, and forms can buy and rent to locals, then that would be a great way to meet this as well. But I am happy to hear that y'all passed that 30% of those restricted units could be owned by somebody out of the community, but of course, still rented to local workforce. So thank you so much for your time. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Courtney. I appreciate those comments and sorry you didn't get to make those earlier at 6, but they are duly recorded. Thank you for your time.
Have a nice night.
Cool. So I think we're on to future considerations. Megan, as I understand, you have been working with other planning bodies where it's honest.
So, yeah, so Chrissy and I are gonna email, figure out a date, and then I'll reach out to those other entities and we'll get a date set.
Super.
We got this.
Thank you so much, guys.
We'll keep you updated.
And there was like a little bit of housekeeping while we're talking future considerations. I wanted to ask you guys, new faces, hello. We had just barely, as a body, been using a form that was meant to help Mikhail sort of triage agenda items and suggestions. That kind of fell by the wayside as, you know, staffing challenges arose. Would you still like us to use that form for things like Megan's scheduling a meeting? Aaron's got updates from the housing task force. Or can we just shoot you an email? How do you want
I think
that?
this is your board. You guys should run it the way you feel is most efficient. And I get that it's important to include staff in that. But it's your board and I want you guys to all feel empowered to make sure that you're getting whatever you want on your meeting.
So,
You dictate to me.
so I guess my thing is, my interests will be to not like overload your work. Keep it organized and just make sure that when we are discussing something in a meeting, it is duly noticed on the agenda on Civic Link or whatever the website's called. So, yeah. Yeah.
It would be, I think that it should come from you though. I would never, so if people are emailing me asking me for something on the agenda, I would always.
Yeah, please help Megan's inbox and route it to me so I can send her one email with several items and not several emails with one item.
I have a question. Are we still, since it's been so long, are we still going to go through the Luke and basically decide, you know, we were going to edit it all the way through? Is that still on our agenda?
Mm-hmm.
I have a meeting later.
Okay.
One comment on that. I did find that PDF a little cumbersome.
Yeah.
And if I could just be like, I'll put all that info in there, but there was a couple times I'm like, I only had my phone and I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah, to be entirely honest, I hate versioning PDFs and all that crap anyway. If you have something you want to talk about, you can just email it to me and I'll work with Chrissy, we'll just get it up there.
Don't try to beat
It shouldn't be an hour.
So one more question about the future too, is future land use plan. We did quite a bit of work on that, and then I think we were gonna hire a consultant to do some next step. And the funding even got approved for that.
Funding was approved, yeah.
Is that gonna wait until we have a new?
Well, me,
administrator?
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the funding that was associated with that is going to be reallocated to the land use code. Cause I think that that is the most critical thing to get solid. Before we start future planning. I mean, we need, you know,
We've done a lot of future land use planning.
I mean, it'll be incorporated into the land use code updates. Like the zoning map, I think is the thing that we're worried that we need to work into the land use code
What you're
and the
saying,
language surrounding that.
basically what you're saying is that the land use code updates are gonna be worked in cooperation with the work we've already done.
Yes, with the future, yes, like that's going to be,
Makes sense.
no, I'm not throwing it out. No, I'm saying like those are, because of all of that that's there, it needs to be incorporated into the land use
Right.
code. The land use code needs to be updated, so that is being.
Also, take a moment to point out particularly land use cut updates and future land use plan, and particularly when we're talking about maps, let's remember that the planning department as yet does not have a planning administrator or director, and so they're sorry, but like not a permanent time dedicated employee.
Wow.
There could be some running.
I am looking out for you guys, I promise, don't. But there are administrative authorities that only that full-time permanent staff person can be doing as far as contract and procurement goes, let's be patient with them. And just, you know, accept their way. We got an engineer and back up the building, but we're not out of the woods yet, we still have, there are still like 6 vacancies in that, okay? So.
We filled in the work. Not negative. And welcome, Sean Glidder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. Well, good to end on a bit of giggles, but I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make this done.
Seconded. Everybody, let's go.
Good.
Yeah. Grand good story about.
I know, this is why I brought this different in for me. My dad, against streets are all this gap.
Oh, there it is.